more humane and humanistic understanding of ancient religion. And I hope that your viewers understand this simply is an aperitif, and that they can seek out fuller meals in other ways.
Yeah.
I think we need to put before them reference works that allow them to make their own judgments and to hone their critical acumen so that they don't fall into the pits of bad religion.
Let me speed in a little here with this.
Oh, you want to move it forward?
Yeah, I want to make sure they can hear Dennis.
Okay.
Most of all, that's the biggie, because Dennis is a kind, soft-spoken gentleman.
Well, I'm going to be soft-spoken tonight, too.
That's fine.
Because I'm
can
exhausted.
what did you take away from this week?
Oh, this has been an amazing week. And not even just because of all the amazing food we had.
It has been amazing.
Dennis MacDonald can cook. He made some really excellent meals while we were here, and I'm very grateful for that. And he's an excellent host. No, I've learned a lot as well. A lot of useful stuff. I think every video we did has got some really neat stuff in it. It's pretty good. I like it when someone can produce content like this in bulk and then really zero in on the stuff that needs to be said, and then giving us the opportunity to spell it out. Having both of us here has been super helpful too.
Yeah, right.
Oh my gosh, you're not lying.
It was better than if you had come here and then come to my place and done us separately.
Yeah.
It was so much better having all three of us.
And like you said, you had cobwebs on ideas you read 50 years ago that Carrier
Came up
kind
again.
of brought out of you, and you brought out a Carrier. So
Yeah.
there's stuff that you went back to grad school and went, oh my God, I remember reading that. Whoa.
Yeah.
You guys dug for...
And we know some people in common from our previous schooling and such, so.
Yeah. It was
That's
fun.
awesome.
And you were a great host too.
Thank you.
So we appreciate that.
I know I'm hyper. I know I always have a super amount of energy.
Oh, I like that. That's good.
When I get home, though, I'm not. This is all gun-ho, and I'm way more chill.
All chill and soft-spoken.
Well, I am definitely a go guy, but I don't put it into overdrive like this.
Yeah.
I planned this. This costs money. This costs time. This costs energy. This costs the sacrifice of my wife and kids not being around their father, their husband.
For a week.
And for a week.
Yeah.
But this history that we're making for that 7-day sacrifice
Yeah.
is worth what we're doing, and my wife believes in what we're doing. So I can't have a better support team.
Yeah, you've collected about a year or two's worth of content you'll be able to make use of. It's fantastic.
Well, hopefully, and I say this out loud, we've got a super chat. I'm going to jump in there and get it. But I hope to eventually figure out, as we talked about a conference idea, or even in reserving a room at some point next to some conference that's already got the money, because we don't have the financial backing, but maybe we can afford at a conference to have you scholars go to this little hotel and we all sit and have a spiel where you come on for 30 minutes to an hour. And
It's hard to organize things that complicated, but sure, yeah, man, keep me in mind.
Not right now, though. Don't even think
No,
about it.
not even.
Couldn't pay him enough. Richard, Braveheart Fighting Arms, thank you for the super chat. Richard, what is your opinion on the book The Darkening Age by Catherine Nixie? How many manuscripts were lost during the Christian Purge?
Yeah, we answered this question, but I can't remember if we recorded or if it was a live
No,
chat.
I don't remember either.
Yeah, I don't remember which it was. This is a more simply phrased question. It's going to sound redundant, but I'll say again. It wasn't, calling it a purge is inaccurate, right? So there were very, very few manuscripts that Christians actively sought out to destroy. The loss of manuscripts is principally caused by two things. One is simple disinterest. Christians were more interested in some things rather than others. And then declining resources, especially in the West. The collapse of Western civilization left them with extremely few resources to preserve manuscripts. And in the East, they had more resources, but still were making choices that we wouldn't have made. And even that got ground down over centuries, because as the Byzantine Empire declined and eventually fell. So the amount, we have less than 1% of what was published in the Roman Empire, at least. If you count Hellenistic Greece and the Roman Empire, we have less than 1% for sure. And in the other video, I don't remember which one it was, I gave some reasons how we can calculate that, but almost everything was lost. So it's an outrageous amount of stuff that was lost. But it wasn't Christians actively throwing It wasn't like Nazi book burnings or anything like that.
No,
That's not what happened.
Though you did say there were times
there were
that
some
actively seek out the destruction.
Some
of
books,
certain-
like the Gospel of Peter, we have a reference to them hunting them down and getting rid of them. But for example, and then there are other examples, magic books and things like magical treatises and such. But some heretical things, obviously. And then I went into a bunch of examples of things that were probably hidden in back rooms for a while and survived in only one manuscript or something after time. But yeah, it's partly the fact that Christianity didn't recover the economy of the world after it collapsed, and partly it's because Christians just weren't interested in the things that we're interested in. So they preserved very little, and they devoted a lot of resources to preserving religious texts that they wanted.
Let me tilt this down just a smidge. So technically, it's not like this conspiracy theory totality. Like, yeah.
And they asked specifically about Nixie. I have not read Nixie's book, so I don't know. I don't know how she frames it or what she says or anything like that. So, I've heard people. I've read reviews and I've heard people talk about Nixie's book, but I can't speak as to what she herself has said. So I can't comment on Nixie in that regard.
Thank you, Braveheart Fighting Arms. I appreciate the super chat, seriously, and the question. It helps out. Like trips like this. Dennis, what do you think about Richard Carrier?
Richard Carrier is a brilliant young man who wrote a wonderful dissertation which was published as a book and develops my mimesis theory, but he does so with a different kind of spin, which I think is perfectly legitimate, especially in some topics. And the difference is this. I argue for direct, conscious, and strategic imitations of Greek poetry in many Jewish and Christian texts. Richard traced the notion of the appearance, tradition, and empty tombs in Greco-Roman literature, but was less interested in direct mimesis of models than the influence of what he would call a mytheme that has various manifestations, including in the myths about Romulus. We have a number of stories in histories where you have absent characters, cenotaphs, that is, empty tombs, and so on. Unfortunately, his work is too radical for him to have gotten a job in the discipline.
I don't want a job in the discipline.
I
haven't
have
really sought one. So.
Well, and I have students, some students who have worked with me who are really fine scholars, and I'm proud of them, have gone into academic positions, but some have been allured into academic administration instead of teaching.
Right.
And some have not been able to get jobs. And Michael Kochenash recently has a job in Belgium. Ruben Dupertuis has an administrative job at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. But Richard has been frustrated. Richard Miller has had trouble finding an academic position. Fortunately, he's also a brilliant computer programmer that tends to pay more, have a better salary than a seminary professor like myself. So, but he continues to do research, he continues to publish. I'm very proud of him. And when he right now has written some really wonderful reviews defending mimesis criticism and his modified version of mimesis criticism, which I actually encourage because both of those models actually happen in the creation of religious literature in antiquity. That is, you have some direct imitations, but you have some that I would call to be poetic radiation in the culture that influences prose from many sources, and the Romulus tradition is a good example.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We've got a super chat. Mark Smith, man, thanks for the super chat, bro. What do you guys think of Acharya S. and Astro-theology?
I don't know if Dennis knows anything about her.
I don't.
AKA Dorothy Murdoch. She Acaria S is what she published under her as a pseudonym until later in life. She's deceased now. I mean, I've been pretty open about the fact that I think she's a crank, and her astrotheology in and of itself is not crank. A good example of professional peer-reviewed astrotheology is David Ulansey's book on Mithraism. So if you want to see how to argue astrotheology legitimately, go get Ulansey's book. And Ulansey's book has been criticized, so don't assume that he's right about everything. But he's generally agreed to be right about the astrotheology stuff. There's some other stuff that Beck and some others have criticized him on, and I think in those debates, sometimes Beck is right and sometimes Ulansey is. But there's no astrotheology in the origins of Christianity. Even if somehow it got in later, like in the Middle Ages, it does not explain the origins of Christianity. And her entire theory involved a conspiracy theory of Alexandrian monks in the 2nd century, and there's a bunch of aspects to her thing. But none of the astrotheology stuff actually holds up by any legitimate method.
Like Devil's Pulpit, I'm sure you've heard of. There was a pastor, or he was like a heretical pastor who'd been kicked out, went to jail. He started teaching the whole New Testament is this allegory of the sun, moon, and stars, and the signs, and and he got like serious persecution from the Christians. I wonder, but
I mean that's stupid. That no one should get persecuted for something like that. But no, the theory isn't true. Christianity was not an astrotheological sect when it originated. It was a Jewish apocalyptic sect when it originated. So these ideas come from scripture and scriptural numismatics, scriptural numerology, not from stellar or astro theology. And even if it involved cosmology, that's different, right? Cosmology and astrotheology are not the same thing. Astrotheology is astrology. Specific aspects of astronomy relate to the structure of the religion, which is true of Mithraism. You can show an astrotheological basis for Mithraism, or Roman Mithraism, I should be specific, but not for Christianity.
Thank you, Mark. I hope that answered your question. I really do appreciate the super chat, my friend.
And I apologize to everyone if I sound very low energy, and that's because I am.
Can you just blame me out loud?
He's worked us to death. We've done so many shoots for so many days that the fatigue has finally caught up with me, basically.
I'm not lying. Like that he's not lying. Sorry, he's not lying. Like I've really been pushing guys. You pushed me a couple mornings too. I mean, I was late one morning. Like, what's up, man?
Well, we just wanted to make sure you're alive, you know.
Yeah. I was tired.
And this, let's not get crazy. This was still early in the morning. It wasn't that late a morning.
No,
so
8:17 or something. I remember it was something like that.
Yeah. It wasn't much later than 8.
Well, we would get up. I want everyone to know what we did, right? They're gonna see the content, but we would get up, ass crack of dawn. It was really interesting. Dennis was up before all of us every morning, of course, getting breakfast started and figuring out what we might want to eat, get a coffee going. Carrier has a certain ritual he has every morning till lunchtime, and then next thing you know, we're recording till Richard's like,
wow.
I gotta eat.
We were recording since about 8:30 or 9 every day.
Every day.
Starting from, and then we break for lunch, and then we resume again, and then we do. On some of the nights we were doing lives like this.
Yeah.
And that's what it's been doing since Monday. Well, he's been doing it longer than me. He did all Monday. I was driving all Monday, so I still have exhaustion points for that.
Yeah.
But yeah. So
yeah, we had fun. We got a lot. I can't even imagine. I don't know how many.
You've got an amazing trove of stuff in there, and a lot of them just really folded in really well. We have a lot of given back and forth, and structure with this loops around where we sew up the point by the end, and it's not just random rambling. No, they actually, many of these videos have turned out really well.
Yeah, there's some passion. There's like a lot of working together on so much. I think people will appreciate it a lot. Got a couple super chats.
Oh yeah.
Mitch, what's up, bro? Appreciate you, man. I saw your comments earlier on the Patreon post that I made exclusive to you guys, and I appreciate your compliment, man. I seriously do. Thanks for the super chat as well. what were the most historically interesting heretical Christian sects that survived the fall of the Western Empire mid-5th century?
Oh.
Any standouts? That's an interesting question.
It is, and it's outside my field of study, so I really couldn't answer that question.
Okay, so since you can't quite answer that specifically and be as accurate as like what is the most, what are some heretical sects though? If we go down in history, I know we have.
So my answer is going to be boring. People will be disappointed. So I'd mentioned this. I think I mentioned it on one of the videos we recorded. There is a mention, and I mentioned this because I cited in my book The Scientist in the Early Roman Empire. And I have a whole chapter in there about how the declining interest in science among Christians. Scientific values in particular. They were against curiosity, they were against empiricism, and they were against progressivism, the idea that you can make progress in knowledge about nature. And they were very, there's a lot of hostility to Greek philosophy and natural philosophy in particular. And in the early days, this is like the first 3 centuries. They warmed a little bit to the classical tradition after that, but still not enough. But there's an interesting passage, and of course to do this I have to cite every example, including any possible counterexamples. And there's a counterexample that unfortunately is an example of a heresy that was quashed, and we know nothing, literally nothing whatever about this heresy except the single passage in which someone is gloating over the fact that they have suppressed the literature of the sect. And the crime of the sect was that they took a great deal of interest and used the works of Galen, Aristotle, and a few other significant philosophers. And that was piqued my interest. Like, I want to meet these Christians. Where's their literature? This is very interesting. Like, why Galen? Because there's a lot of interesting stuff about what they'd be interested in. They had something about the interest in the logic. So Galen wrote famous treatises on logic that was some of the most advanced treatises on logic ever written in the ancient world.
Wow.
And other things. So just the fact that they're reading Galen is incredible. And also there was the fact that they were interested in Aristotle in particular rather than Plato, for example. So, and there were some other names, and I think Euclid and some other interesting names that were in the list of things that they were studying and they were encouraging the study of. I want to know more about that sect, right? So, but we don't. It was so successfully quashed that all we have is this one reference to it.
Dennis?
I have my own answer, but it is not, the first part of that answer is not directly an answer to the question. That is, I think one of the most interesting movements that became heretical, but it died out before this time frame, is Marcionism.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a very intelligent form of Gnosticism that has multiple intellectual strands. It is it has a particular ethic and understanding of the Hebrew Bible, and early Christians had an opportunity, especially in Rome, to choose Marcion over what became Orthodoxy. And I think much more should be said about Marcion. By the way, we know a lot about Marcion, and it's not that I think we need to revisit the evidence, but basically this has been well-worked territory and is well known. But it was really quite a fascinating heretical movement. The one that fits the time frame here, in my view, that's most interesting is Manichaeism. And it actually had quite a bit of traction for centuries.
Yeah,
and part of it is that it has Chinese influence, it has Greek influence, it has what we would call Orthodox Christian influence, and it was one of the major purveyors of Christian Apocrypha, especially the apocryphal Acts of the Apostles. And we have a life of Mani, as a matter of fact, that probably reflects some real historical interest. And it became a major challenge to the church because it had its own intellectuals, it had its own church structure, it had a very clear ethical, which was, by the way, oppressive to women and to some extent, but also liberating of women to some extent. And this became a problem for some of the Orthodox because women were having too much authority in some cases. There were they used the New Testament, but they also used non-canonical texts and treated them as scripture. And this is one reason, by the way, and we actually know it because of secondhand literature by the Orthodox, that this is one of the reasons the Apocryphal Acts of Apostles did not survive. It's because they were so successful among the outsiders. And again, there's a lot of work done on Manichaeism. One of the challenges of Manichaeism is that so many of the sources are in esoteric languages for most scholars. So we have some Greek texts, but we also have a number of texts in various languages, such that some have said no one can be linguistically competent to deal with all Manichaean materials. The very fact that we have such great geographic and linguistic distribution shows that this religion had quite a bit of traction, and it's quite amazing, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Thanks for that super chat. Sean A. Garrison says, I bought another Carrier book today because he's such a trooper. I tried to think of a question, but I'm too wasted. Hold on, everybody.
Trying to catch up.
You don't have any wine in your glass, Dennis?
Do we have any scotch left?
There's scotch. You want scotch?
Yeah, I'd like a touch.
So we're going to cheers, and this is a cheers to you, Sean, for the super chat, my friend. Oh yeah, you got to pour it first.
He's got to pour. He's short.
No, go ahead. I'm listening.
No, I want to
He wants to. Yeah, there you go.
He's celebrating. He's doing a ritual act of Manichaeism right now. So it's an esoteric thing.
The name Dennis comes from Dionysus.
Right. All right. Thanks. Cheers, gentlemen.
Hey.
To my sparkling water, and their.
Pellegrino.
Pellegrino.
Yeah. There you go. Thanks, Sean. That was to you, man. Thanks. All right, let's see what else we have here. There's a couple super chats. Pony No More says the Maenad striking the rock to get water in Bacchae reminds me of Moses doing the same. Was this a common trope in ancient literature? Let's start with Dennis, and then this is definitely in your alley.
I don't know the answer to that, actually. I haven't researched it. So.
In one of our segments, I might have talked about magic wands in antiquity.
Right.
And you find them already in Homer. You find them with Hermes. You find them with Asclepius and Hygiena.
I think that was in our second live. It was the Caudaceus.
The Caudaceus.
Versus the Asclepius staff. But,
and we have Christian art in which Jesus is holding a wand when he's performing a miracle. And so this is a very common trope. It's like Harry Potter having his wand and various wands that do different things. So I don't think here we have a mimetic tradition. I think we have a cultural tradition that somehow identifies wands with magic. But one thing that's really quite fascinating about these two is in these cases, the wand is in the hands of what we call a donor deity. Not all deities were donor deities. And the famous donor deities in Greece were Dionysus, who supplied liquids of various kinds, not water and wine and so on, and Demeter, who gave grains. And so Demeter's responsible for all food, and Dionysus for drink. So Moses striking the rock is similar to what you have in the Bacchae with striking a rock in the desert. Now, then we have the relative dating of the Bacchae and the books of Moses, and the Bacchae is written toward the end of the 5th century, beginning of the 4th century, something like that. BC. And it's one of it's probably his last play. Now, the book, the story about Moses striking the rock is variously dated, but it could very well be after the Bacchae. So this may be a place where there's a consciousness of a trope, where Moses becomes a donor deity in the wilderness, supplying Israel with water, that works similarly with the Bacchae. Now, one of the fascinating things is when one finds in the Hebrew Bible and in the Greek world similar mythemes, and I would say that's what this is. It's not a full narrative.
The magic wand concept goes even back to Sumer and Babylon and stuff. So it's pre-Greek.
That part is right.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. So the same way that you have the flood myth that's in the Bible is also a version of it ends up in Greece, but of course their common ancestor is the Gilgamesh epic. The magic wand stories might have had the same origin, like originated back in Sumerian times, and then radiate separately out into the different cultures adjacent.
And we know in Homer already, Hermes has a magical wand that puts people to sleep and so on. So I just wanted just one little methodological note. When one finds parallels between the ancient Near East and Greece, it's important to say in which social and geographical culture is it more likely that the story emerged. To give an example, just a very simple example, when one has a flood story, it's not coming from Greece and Rome. A flood story is coming from Egypt or the Mesopotamian area. If you have a sailing story, the sailing story is not coming from Palestine. It's coming from the Greek world or maybe the Roman world. When you find a man-to-man combat...
More likely Greek or Phoenician. The Romans were not great sailors until later in their relative history.
Yeah. When you find a man-to-man combat, you're more likely to have that myth theme coming from the Greek world than you are from the Middle East. This has been formalized by classicists, but I think those who are interested in ancient religion need to pay attention. It's possible to look in the myth itself and make an assessment about what is the most natural environment for it.
Thank you. Super chat from Jay Crone says, did the 12 disciples start the religion, or was it other people later on? And I think in the question...
They wouldn't have been called disciples at the time, whether Jesus existed or not. But I think so. That would be my assumption, is that the religion began... I would say Cephas is the principal... or the pillars, Cephas, James, and John, were the principal movers. But certainly some sort of council of 12 or quorum of 12 was part of that movement from the beginning.
And would you agree, Cephas?
More or less, yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate the super chat, Jay. Marcus Gonzalez, thanks for the super chat. I don't see a comment, just showing love. Hold on. Let me scroll back up because it refreshes. Bear with me, please. So he says, there's a super chat. Look it down, look it down.
Yeah,
okay, great job, all of you. Thank you so much for organizing this, Derek. Richard and Dennis are amazing people. Thank you for everything.
Oh, nice.
Awesome. Thanks for saying.
Yeah.
Thanks for saying that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Marcos. I appreciate it.
It makes us feel like our exhaustion is worth it.
Yeah. They're going to sleep like babies.
Yeah.
Right? This asshole is gone.
No, I'm glad this content is liked and viewed and gets influence, and that our knowledge can spread. It's not just going to die with us.
Yeah. Oh, it's definitely not. The world is going to hear about this. I am Toki Wartooth. I hope I'm saying that right. Thank you for the super chat. I learned over the last few years from you gentlemen how most of the ancient world did not trust rhetoric or use logic like in the modern age.
Yeah.
Before you answer, let me restart this. I didn't do this last night. I should have, because then they're like...
All right. Well, so they just learned that this is the case. Yeah, that was actually... They call it the Greek miracle, but it was actually a fairly unique development of the Greeks. We have something similar happening in China, but it didn't go to full flower the way it did in Greece and then into Rome. But yeah, like the development of systematic logic and the development of rhetoric as a science are unique Greek developments. Everything else after that has been influenced by that or building on that. The Chinese had a really impressive intellectual, analytical environment, but they never systematized logic or math or anything like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Justin Hooper, I hope I'm saying that right. Thank you for the super chat, my friend. I really do appreciate it. Showing the love. Cade Welly's back for more. She says, Dennis, I asked a similar question yesterday, so please forgive me. But are there any jokes in Homer? Or is there anything that looks like it could have been a joke, but the nuance has been lost?
Oh, gosh. Shit, let me think about
Homer is so culturally informed that things that are funny to us are not necessarily funny to ancients. And I can give you an example.
This is good.
When lame Hephaestus runs through the halls, people laugh at him in derision. When Telemachus, when someone sneezes, people think that's terrific, and they laugh at him. So humor is so embedded in culture that it's hard to know. But I do think you can appeal to irony in ancient texts to see the playfulness of the text, and in fact, they are humorous in some cases. So I would say that a reservoir, and it's a rich reservoir, by the way, of irony in ancient literature can be understood as jokes. In antiquity, we don't have a particular word for joke. We do have a word for it's similar to a joke, but it's something like a piteous or something. It's a trick.
Something that amuses children.
Yeah, something that amuses children. It's a trick. And we have some examples of them, and some of them are allegories. I'll tell you one of my favorite stories, which usually is considered to be a joke. I consider it to be an ironic allegory. In the Acts of John, John, with his disciples, pull into Ephesus, and he checks into a hotel. And when he's there, the bed that he's got is full of bed bugs. And he tells the bed bugs to scram, and the bed bugs leave the bed, go down the bedposts, and march in the streets. So the disciple has the apostle has a good night of sleep, and when he gets up, then he calls them all back, and they come back into the bed. Now, obviously, that's a hysterical, a really fun story. It's not in the Bible, I grant you, but it's an example of having a playful allegory. But the allegory actually is a Platonic allegory, because Socrates thought that people would be reincarnated in various ways, and among the ways they could be incarnated is into bedbugs or into ants. And so they have actual mentalities. And so these ants have more obedience to the Lord than mortals do. And we know that because one of the associates of John, who goes into this hotel, is a prostitute. And we know in the Platonic circle, there were at least 2 prostitutes that played an important role. Another of the people who is there is Aristarchus. Well, we know that there's an Aristarchus in the Platonic circle. So a intellectual reader would read that story and say, oh, what fun, but recognize that this is a spoof on the Socrates' notion of reincarnation.
I can tell a joke. It's not from Homer, but so there's a story in ancient literature about, so Socrates had a bunch of disciples, and they all kind of broke off and did their own thing. Two of them who didn't get along were Plato and Diogenes. Diogenes went on to found Cynicism, sort of like the ultimate anarchy hippie religion or philosophy, and Plato went on to do Platonism, right? And Plato's trying to be this brilliant analytical philosopher, and like someone's challenging him to like, how do you define a man? And he says a featherless biped. And they're insisting on featherless biped. That covers it. And then Diogenes is just like, God, these people are so stupid. I really hate these people. So he plucked a chicken and ran into Plato's class and held it up and said, "Behold a man!" And then at which Plato said, "With what does he say? With toenails or something like that? Is like a featherless biped with certain kind of toenails. That's the definition of man." Just to rule out the plucked chicken.
There are other jokes in Plato too, by the way.
Yeah, I bet. Thank you guys. Troy Miller says, it is a heresy to super chat without a question, so I'm not asking a question. My man, Troy, thank you for that heresy, my friend.
Troy, we can talk about Troy.
I know, right? You guys start getting his brain going, and You're going to hear everything under the sun pertaining to the Homer. Oh, they're going to be excited to see what we have. Mark Smith super chatted. We got quite a few here. So I think the story of Hera seducing Zeus in the Iliad was probably meant to be humorous because of the self-absorbed and foolish way Zeus reacts.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great example. And you have other examples of jokes. For example, Hephaestus catching his wife Aphrodite and Hermes and Ares in the act of lovemaking, and he captures them and he wants to keep them, and then even the gods stand around and laugh at it. So, yeah, you get a lot of jokes in the Homeric epics.
That's funny. Thank you for the super chat. Yagayo says, was the name Jesus Christ used for Jewish rebellion leaders, like the name Pharaohs was used for Egyptian kings?
Used implies like a regular pattern of discourse. I wouldn't put it that way. At least we don't have any evidence of that. But remember, Christ just means anointed. So obviously that was a word widely in use, and also just meant Messiah, right? So it's just the Greek translation of the word Messiah. So yeah, was Messiah a concept that people claim to be a Messiah or claim others were Messiahs? Yeah. Jesus is just Joshua, right? So it's actually one of the most common Jewish names, but it refers to the Joshua, right? The famous Joshua who conquered Israel, the founder of Israel as a nation. And then there's, it also means God's Savior. So someone could claim the name Joshua in theory. If they wanted to claim they were God's Savior, they could assume the name. But also if you wanted people to think that you're the new Joshua, the new conqueror of Israel, you might do this. Now, I mentioned in one of the videos we talked about that Josephus, several scholars have noticed this and published it, but Josephus has several characters that he describes who are clearly, he never calls them Jesus Christ. He never uses either Joshua or Christ to refer to them. But he describes what they did, and they're clearly modeling themselves as Joshuas, because they would do something that Joshua did, like part the Jordan or topple the walls of Jerusalem. They would claim to be able to do one of these things. And so they're all doing things that Joshua did. So they're clearly like trying to, at least the way Josephus is telling the story, they're all trying to represent themselves as Joshuas, new Joshuas who would reconquer Israel, and as such, they were representing themselves as messiahs who would free Israel from their conquerors. So they are, and the way they're portraying themselves are as Jesus Christ. You could say that. Did they themselves ever use those words? We don't have any evidence of that. Even Josephus doesn't use the words, but the concepts are clearly there. These are a bunch of Jesus Christs in Josephus using the descriptive words that they're clearly trying to go for. So that would be the most that I could answer that question with.
I want to go back to the previous chat who mentioned Hera's seduction of Zeus.
Okay.
It not only is a clever story, but it's one that attracted a Jewish imitation. And we have it in the book of Judith. When Judith wants to seduce Holofernes, she goes through a ritual of adornment that includes jewelry and washing, anointing, ointments, and a garment. And you can actually put the story of the seduction of Holofernes right with what's going on with Judith adorning herself with what Hera does, and it's quite clear. Now, what happens to Holofernes? He has his head chopped off and brought back to the city and displayed. Well, that's the story of the Bacchae. So here you have a very famous Jewish story that is imitating a Homeric epic and an Athenian play in order to glorify the execution of Holofernes. It really is an amazing story.
Dudist priest, he's back. Your takes on what happened to Jesus' father, based on how Moses and Aaron had to keep God from killing off the entire Jewish race. I'm thinking Jesus lost it and turned him into an oxen cart.
I don't know if this is a deliberate or accidental allusion to the infancy gospels, but there are actual gospels that were developed in which the toddler Jesus actually does shit like this. He scares the hell out of his parents, and his father tries to diplomatically beg him to stop killing people in town. because as a kid he would someone would bump into him and he would curse him and he would die, or he'd killed his teacher for being mean to him, and he's just and literally the parents of the town were coming. And this is in the gospel. Parents of the town came to Joseph and Mary and were saying, please tell your kid to stop killing our children. So what kind of nightmare horror story is this? But
Jesus
it's all to
on Nightmare Street, or what?
well, it's all to display how powerful and absolute God is, and so it's Jesus as God is what it's kind of a realistic depiction of if you had someone as arrogant and omnipotent as God and you put it in the mind of a child, what are you going to expect to happen? So you can get a Twilight Zone episode out of it, right? So
just two really quick responses.
Yeah.
One is in the Iliad, it's Priam, the father of Hector, who buries his son. In the Gospel of Mark, it's a person who is called Joseph of Arimathea, but it is not his father Joseph who buries him. So it's an implicit criticism of Joseph already in the New Testament. But after that, we have an apocryphal tradition of Joseph the carpenter. And he becomes, he's not punished. So Jesus is not doing him in. It's rather that he becomes a saint of sorts himself.
Interesting. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Dudist Priest, thanks for the interesting, funny question, man. Justin Hooper says, Richard, how surprised would you be if evidence of a historical Jesus was found, given you espouse such a compelling model where one was invented?
Well,
and by the way, I want to say...
mathematically, only 67% surprised.
Well, I want to say, you also show an invented Jesus, right? So, but...
Yeah, I think 1 in 3 chance that could actually happen. Well, 1 in 3 chance that's true. I'm not very confident that we'll get any new evidence that would be useful. But it's entirely possible to get evidence that would confirm Jesus existed. I don't think it's impossible that Jesus didn't. I don't think it's impossible that Jesus existed. I think it has respectable odds, is how I'd frame it.
Dennis?
Well, really, it's a question for Richard, I think.
I know what I'm saying. Let's suppose, since it is a question for Richard, I want to reframe it real quick, just to kind of put it into a historicist angle. We have this mythical Jesus. How shocked would you be if we actually found the bones of Jesus, given we have these fictional gospels claiming they can't find the body? And here we go. We somehow, and I'm hypothesizing, we somehow know that was his body, and we know this is the guy.
It's a lot of ifs.
Well, it's a counterfactual, and it's hard.
It's a fun play game.
No, it's fine. No. And I would say it's great to find somebody's bones. I don't know what finding somebody's bones tells you about their ethics. I don't know what it tells you about their commitment to people or to women or whatever. I would be willing to sacrifice all of Jesus's bones for about 4 words that I know came from Jesus without ambiguity, because it's the words of Jesus and his vision. Now, I'm a historicist.
Yeah.
And I would say, from my perspective, we have plenty of evidence. We don't need more evidence that Jesus existed. We need to have what I would say a somewhat lower bar for historical reliability than my friend Richard has. And we've talked about that and so on, because I do think actually we have plenty of evidence for it. But that evidence, in my view, is much more important than finding Jesus's bones.
Interesting. Appreciate it. Let's see. How do I drop this off the screen?
By the way, the idea that if we found Jesus' bones, we'd be great, there's a disease in modern culture which I call Bible and fantasy.
Yeah.
And that if we can find an ossuary with the name of Jesus' brother, or if we could just find Jesus' bones, or if we could just have the Shroud of Turin, we'd know the truth of Christianity. Come on, that's Bible land fantasy world.
I can tell you what I'd rather find than bones. I don't even know how you would prove that they were his bones anyway without texts confirming it. But anyway, so we have a book by Lucian of Samosata, and he's kind of like a Mark Twain of the 2nd century.
Brilliant
And
author.
he runs into another founder of religion, a kind of guy who's created his own cult that actually was super popular. The emperors changed the names of towns for it, and coins were minted, and there's statues. The religion lasted hundreds of years. We have statuary and stuff showing that. But he created his own god, and it was a god based on, it was a snake that he had a puppet machinery that would make it look like a snake with a human head that could tell oracles and stuff. Anyway, Alexander of Abonoticus is the guy's name. And Lucian gives us a whole story, and it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, satirical, making fun of this guy. And Lucian's trying to debunk his shit, and that, like James Randi, basically. He's like, so it's actually a really neat story. Now, would it have been cool if someone like Lucian of Samosata, some Diogenes or something character, had run into Jesus in Palestine, in whether it's Galilee or wherever, and had written a story like this, even if it was irreverent and a little bit unreliable because it's mocking and so on, we would from that actually know way more about Jesus than we know now. So,
thank you. Jay Crone has a super chat. Where does that tall hat come from that the Catholic priests wear?
The Flamens, I think. I'm not sure. You could check, but I think it's the Roman Flaminate wore a hat like that. Pontiff Maximus might also have worn that hat during ceremonies.
I think so, probably.
But it's a Flaman's hat. It comes from paganism. They just co-opted a lot of the regalia of pagan religion.
Isn't it like a fish type? Something like it looks like a...
Yeah, it's like a split long top hat. I don't know. It's a weird hat. I'll give them that.
So I went ahead and blocked the cap troll. And, anyone else who wants to troll can get blocked too, baby. Anyway, Aunt Kathy, thanks for the super chat. Paul and Josephus Flavius, they have a similar writing style, or is that my imagination?
Paul and Josephus?
Yeah.
Not really, no. Not even slightly. They write in the same dialect. They're both Koine, but no, their styles, their discourse styles are very different, and their linguistic styles are different.
Appreciate it. Yeah. I don't know if that gets into the theory where people are trying to say Paul was Josephus or vice versa.
Yeah, it might be. I would say Josephus' style has more in common with Galen, and no one would argue that they're the same person. So, right. So, one can't really argue that way.
Well, people do go to. This is a good little fun fact. There are people who do the whole parallelism stuff, and we know Luke Acts is lifting out of Josephus, and we do have these narratives where some people will go, for example, there's the shipwreck, and there's a shipwreck with Joseph, and it's like...
You mentioned that Luke Acts, there actually has been stylistic studies to try and compare Luke Acts with Josephus, and they found commonalities, but they aren't enough commonalities to establish common authorship, but they do suggest common influences or common social station.
Interesting. I appreciate that, Aunt Kelly. Let me pop it down here. All right. So now we're back to us again. Carrie, what do you think of Dennis MacDonald, I guess, in general?
I'm grateful for his existence and all his work. His tireless work over his life. He's produced a lot of very valuable and useful stuff, especially the Mimesis of Homer, because we were talking about this earlier, off camera, but it was just the fact that you wouldn't have seen this normally, because Homeric studies is inherently its own difficult thing, and New Testament studies is inherently its own difficult thing. So you almost never see someone cross those two disciplines. All the Homeric people are not interested in the Bible, and all the Bible people are not interested in Homer. And you would have to have been interested in both, and to take the effort, and it is effort, to learn them, at least enough to be able to do this kind of comparison. So Dennis would ask, why did no one notice this before? And I think there's no one had the dual discipline to actually do it.
Remind me of this. I have further on this with Dennis's work. We got one super chat. I really want to probe you on this just to get it on record, because I think it'll be interesting. We're one thing, and I'm going to get to your suggestion.
I can even broaden that, but because I think this is just an illustration of a concept that can be iterated in many other respects. Interdisciplinary studies can always be incredibly fruitful. If someone studies the New Testament and something else very interesting,
sociology,
they will see
philosophy,
things. Anthropology. Yeah, there have been a few these kinds of overlaps. The more overlaps you have, the more you're going to see things in the works and the text and the evidence that other people won't see because they don't have that other discipline mastered. Right. So I super encourage interdisciplinary studies for people.
I want to comment just a little bit on that.
Okay.
We've been talking about how classics get ignored, Greek poetry gets ignored by New Testament scholars or people who study the Roman Empire. You have the prejudice going the opposite direction too. You have
Yeah.
Homeric scholars who really do not want
Yeah.
people who deal with Judaism and early Christianity screwing around with their precious texts.
That's right, yeah.
And I have a few friends who are willing to cross that bridge. But there is, unfortunately, and by the way, I have tremendous respect for Homeric scholarship and I just absorb it whenever I can. But there is a cultural arrogance in the discipline. And there are some
a lot of ancient historians who don't even want to study New Testament studies, who don't want to weigh in on it. They avoid it. Yeah.
So the prejudice goes in both ways. And of course, it sometimes is called stovetop disciplines, where we're so insulated and protected from each other that we can't learn from each other. One of the most vicious and unfair reviews I've ever had was from a classicist and a Homeric scholar who dealt with the reception of Homer, and he did not want me as a biblical scholar screwing around with his texts. And I tried to write a review of the review, and the journal would not publish it because it was a classical position. And so you have this stovepipe, or I would call it actually an intellectual prejudice, that it goes in both directions.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, we're going to ask, let me restart these audios and ask these two super chats. I want to probe deeper into... All right, we are recording. So Cade Welly, thank you for the super chat, says, is it true ancient Greece didn't have the word blue? And if that's true, are there any other surprising things that they believed that now sounds ridiculous or goes against common sense?
No, it's true. There is no word for blue in ancient Greek. It's
Just blue as itself. There are words that include blue. I have a whole article on this, on the color blue and how it was identified linguistically in the ancient world. This often gets telephone gamed into the cognitive argument that they'd never experienced the color blue.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is not at all true. Just because your words have wider valences doesn't mean you're not recognizing the existence of a color. But so I have a whole article on this for people who are interested, and I go into that and how to parse that and do that correctly.
Thank you for that super chat, Kate. I hope that answered your question. Andrew Atkins, super chat. Hi, Richard. How does Jesus' reference to the Son of Man in the Gospels tie into Jesus' mythicism?
So I'll just say, on the supposition of the mythicist model, that it all is drawing in ideology from Daniel and from Enoch and from some other texts to try and associate these messianic concepts with Jesus. On historicity, however, if you suppose historicity, there are several other possible answers.
Which we have him on record.
Yeah, which I think Dennis knows quite a lot about. So I'm actually going to the bathroom, so you can go ahead and tackle that.
You already...
No, we don't need to revisit it.
Yeah, so there's a whole video, my friend Andrew, where Dennis actually goes into the Son of Man argument, and it's all in high definition. So either you can wait till that's public on YouTube, or if you want to join MythVision Patreon, that's a way to see all of the videos once I get them up. But specifically, he goes deep into his particular historical approach. It's not just your particular, but it's the historical.
You want me to give a thumbnail response?
Yeah.
The earliest reference we have to Jesus as the Son of Man appears in either Mark, which is a surviving gospel, or more likely in the Q document.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is a Q document, apparently every reference to Son of Man appears there before it appears anywhere else. Paul does not know the use of the Son of Man as a way of referring to Jesus. And in the Q document, it seems to be Jesus' preferred way of speaking about himself after his temptations and baptism, where he learns that he is the Son of God. So instead, he rejects the prerogatives of being hagios tou theou, the Son of the God. And when he calls disciples, he says, I don't have a place to lay my head, but nonetheless come and follow hagios tou anthropou. And so the parallelism in the Lost Gospel is really quite striking. Jesus, in his mission, in this case, seems to prefer an identification with those who are sinners and tax collectors, and not with the prerogatives that the devil is offering him in his temptations.
Thank
And
you.
from then, when the Gospels receive Son of Man, they often don't understand that literary ploy in the Lost Gospel, and they do all kinds of gymnastics, not geriatrics, I'm old, gymnastics with that title.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thomas Stern here. Did Paul know Q? So that's a your question. And it's an interesting question to ask, but yeah.
The answer is no, but there are parallels between Paul and the Q document that need to be explained. The one that is actually most tantalizing is Paul knows of a tradition in which the Lord sent out apostles that had to beg in their mission. And we have that apparently in the Q document. So I think that's an independent tradition, a probably early missionizing statement that is known by both Paul and the Q document. And that's fascinating because probably that part of 1 Corinthians is written before the Q document. So then what is the relationship? It's really quite fascinating.
Do you think the Q document knew Paul?
No.
Okay. It's an interesting, you know what I just did there to kind of, that's interesting.
No, it's important. And there are about 6 to 8, depending on how one does it, sayings that overlap in the Pauline tradition and in Q. And one of the most famous is the prohibition of divorce. But another is anticipations of the end and the return of Jesus in the clouds. So that still, in my view, is an open question. The problem is we have Pauline epistles, we don't have Q. Unless you buy my book and then you get a Q.
And then, of course, Carrier would take the Matthean approach right now. You start with like a minimal approach.
Well, like all of these traditions, I do think a lot of these traditions do go back to or previous to Paul. I think they're getting them by revelation rather than a historical person. But if Jesus existed, then yes, this would be the channel by which you would at least find something that Jesus was teaching. You could at least sort of vaguely claim was actually what he actually taught versus what other people were claiming he taught.
Thank you, Thomas, for the super chat. So I think
that's a very good question, by the way.
Yeah, that was, and it's a really interesting one to ask, especially after what you just put me through over the past couple days. I mean, I've really been wrapping my head around this now.
And especially we take it for granted. He and I think, certainly I do. I forget that a lot of other people don't know immediately how to answer that question. Like I could, through metacognition, could know how Dennis would answer that question. But that's because I know lots of stuff about everything, right? Not just his stuff, but I mean just biblical history.
Oh, yeah.
And Paul and all that stuff. But the average person doesn't know all that stuff. So that's why it's an important question.
There's a chasm, too.
That's why I find these kinds of Q&As valuable, because average people aren't going to know this stuff generally. And
that's true.
That's what we exist for. Our job is to disseminate this knowledge to the public. So.
Smoke, thanks for the super chat. Is there any historicity to the story of finding Deuteronomy in the temple during Josiah's reign? So you guys aren't Hebrew Old Testament scholars, true, but...
Oh, I strongly suspect that is a literary, or a myth to justify this newly discovered document.
Yeah.
And we have lots of, in history, there are a lot of these newly discovered documents. Like Rome has, in its own sacred history, has the linen books were like newly discovered, and then this proved all sorts of convenience things.
And those games.
Suddenly discovered books is a trope in world culture. So it's just to say it's suspicious.
So to ask the question about the Sibylline, just in the vein of this, because I like going over to the Greek or to see what the Greek world says.
Well, quite apart from it being a mythological story, it has enormous impact on the reconstruction of Judaism under Josiah.
Okay.
So we can dismiss it as a mythology, but it's a meaningful mythology that reincorporated the Deuteronomistic orientation which plays itself out even into the state of Israel today.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's true.
Cade Welly, thank you for the super chat again. She loves coming back. Was Homer blonde? If not, why do we think this?
Was he blind?
I don't know if it's B-L-O-N-D. So
I think they mean blind. That
Okay,
must be a
okay.
mistype.
Okay, actually, I'd like to speak to that.
Yeah.
Because I have authority on it, actually. Because I only have one eye myself. I'm attentive to blindness. There was no one person who was named Homer. But there is a famous bard in the Odyssey whose name is Demodocus, who is blind. And he's a famous poet among the Phaeacians, and it's said that he has been given the gift of poetry unlike any other. And he's led out of the palace into the games that are being held outside, and he sings marvelous stories, mostly about the Trojan War, but he also has a dirty story about Hephaestus trapping his wife Aphrodite in a net, and so on. Even in antiquity, people thought that Demodocus was a way of Homer inserting himself into the narrative. So the blindness and the great skill of Demodocus bled over into interpretation of Homer himself.
All right, I'm going to take this into a weird direction here because it shouldn't be weird. This is actually the reason I'm doing this. There's a lot of really good books and writings by two women in classics, professors who are really excellent classicists, Ava Chitwood and Mary Lefkowitz. And they've written a lot of books on how the phenomenon of how these fake biographies get written about real poets, in which people dig through their poetry and assume that characters and events in the poems are secret stories about the poet. And so this is exactly, and in fact they use this example, it's one of them. But they find this with the biographies of Euripides had the same thing. They would look at Euripides' plays and then try to turn them into autobiography, which is, so it's a good example of how mythologizing even historical people through a certain technique, and it's similar to, there's a lot of talk about how parables by Jesus become parables about Jesus. John Dominic Crossan's book, Power of Parable, makes that point. And it's a similar kind of phenomenon. Someone will say something, and then that will become a story that somehow tells you something about their biography.
I want to take it even in another direction. What about Stevie Wonder? What about blind banjo players? I'm a banjo player, and there's a long tradition. You can see it in, I forget what the name of the movie was, but you have a famous young blind banjo player. And as a banjo player, I can tell you that playing a banjo, and by the way, Homer and others are lute players.
It's important to say.
They are musicians, and they are called singers. They're not called poets in the early period, they're singers. And there's something about closing your eyes and playing music and singing that is transcendent. And that's why you evoke the muse, from which we get the word music and museum and inspiration. And I think there's something psychological about people thought that Homer must have been somehow divine or had a divine channel because he was able to make such beautiful poetry. And I think there's this tradition that I experience of closing my eyes and playing music. And look at Stevie Wonder and amazing things he's able to do. And we have a tradition of blind musicians and singers. And so it's not implausible that people saw this phenomenon in antiquity and attributed it wrongly to a historical Homer.
Thank you. Mason M1993, was Jesus really into damning people to hell? Are evangelicals right when they say Jesus only cares about worship? So I guess taking the...
I mean, that would be wrong. I mean, even the gospel Jesus, even the fictional Jesus in the Gospels, does not only care about worship. There's a whole moral social program that he's promoting as well. But when you get to the real Jesus, that's a much more difficult question. I would have to tip that.
Even a historicist is not going to say that.
You wouldn't even know like what Jesus actually said, so...
Well, and I don't know what Jesus would have actually said, but I do know that the depiction of him in early texts is not that kind of vindictive, believe in me or you go to hell.
Right. Thank you. The Mythic Life, Kristen Whitaker. I know it's Kristen Hood. Thank you for the super chat, Kristen. I appreciate it. And look, I'm using StreamYard, or I would like start making you guys that I see all the time that are fans of MythVision like moderators and like, you know, be able to help me out if trolls try to pop in. But anyway, to her question, which argument from Earl Doherty's Jesus puzzle first got Dr. Carrier to rethink historicity?
That he didn't start with astro-theology. He started with looking at the Greek. So, like, his arguments actually were based on the Greek and actually an informed understanding of the Greek. You don't usually see that. Can't think of any amateur mythicist that's actually true of. Even Atwill claims to, but it's not. Like, he makes tons of mistakes in the Greek. No, Doherty's knowledge of Greek was really sound, and his willingness and ability to actually check and read the scholarship. So he was near to dissertation quality work, frankly. That impressed me the most. And so the fact that he limited his statements to things that could actually be supported in actual historical work, peer-reviewed work, actual lexicons and things like that. So that was the thing that got me paying attention. And that's even after you subtract all the things that I criticized that I didn't find credible. For instance, he was relying on, for instance, this 5-stage production of Q hypothesis, and that I found extremely implausible, and at least not well supported in the scholarship, and not by Doherty either. But even if you take that away, his argument still stood up. So it was kind of an unnecessary thing to argue for, I found.
Kind of like how you right now, and you don't know, how you feel if Dennis's Q theory, let's just say, wasn't concluded in your mind, it does not take away at all from what you've seen, the mimetic stuff, right? And I don't want to deter off
that's
this.
more complicated because it all depends on dating of Q and what's actually in it. So
Yeah,
that's a
different question.
And this is not the Q that Doherty's working with. So
Did you have an aha moment while you read his book?
No, I never do. It took a long time of like me thinking about it and going like, and what I do when I run into things like this is that how would I prove this false? And with most amateur mythicists, the answer is easy and like too easy. In fact, embarrassingly easy, and it really annoys me. You made me read this stuff, right? And I was like, oh my god, this is so bad. Like, it's obvious that these are mistakes and these are fallacies and so on. But in Doherty, I didn't have that reaction. In Doherty, like, there were mistakes, but they were the kinds of mistakes that a graduate student would make. Not even an undergraduate, but like a graduate student mistake. And even some of them would be debatable whether they are a mistake, that kind of thing. Because there were, like, to be fair to Doherty, there were scholars arguing for this 5-layer theory in under peer review. Like, this wasn't a crank theory. Just because I disagree with it doesn't mean that it was false at the time, or that you shouldn't argue it. But that's the thing. It was the fact that he had a sustainable argument that was well informed and well reasoned. And then, of course, then my next reaction was, well, does anybody have a response to this? So I checked the literature. Nobody responded to it. No one had any arguments. No one had responded to it, so they obviously didn't have arguments against it.
Right.
Did anyone write anything that would count as an argument against it, or that would work? And it was an unresponded to argument, basically. And I felt like at that point, I was like, well, this is a viable theory. I don't know if it's true. That this hasn't had a proper rebuttal from the academy yet. So at that point, I was agnostic. I was like, well, okay, there's this theory. Sitting here right now, not having done research on it, I can't refute it. And no one else has, so I don't know where to stand on this. So that was where I was pretty much just an agnostic on the question until my fans got together a postdoc research grant for me to actually do the study. And that's the only reason I ended up writing a peer-reviewed book on the historicity of Jesus. And then, of course, I did my own research. Took 6 years, pursued every thread, and ended up where I was. But and I did ditch a lot of Doherty. I kept Doherty's key thesis, though. So the structure, and it's totally, I give him credit, it's the basic structure of my minimal mythicism is just Doherty stripped down. I just take all the unnecessary premises out, and what's left over is still fundamentally Doherty's work. And I found that was the only theory of mythicism that was defensible academically. All the others, there's no chance of defending them academically.
Thank you. Mark Smith, thanks for the super chat again, my friend. Was the magic wand of Hermes always associated with a snake?
No, it wasn't. That comes up somewhat later in the tradition, especially related to Asclepius and the god of healing. So early on, it was used for putting people to sleep or waking them up.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate the super chat. Music, thanks for the super chat. Dr. Carrier, with the genre of forged epistles in the 2nd century, how do we know Paul's epistles are authentic? I guess we know 7, have the same author, but could be a prolific fiction letter writer.
Yeah, I'll punt to my article on this. So I have an article on my blog, The Historicity of Paul, where I kind of give the summary argument of why we don't think that they're forgeries. And to add to that, really, and I actually mentioned that in the article, but the one reason is that there are 2 reasons, really, but one of which is that all of the attempts to argue their forgeries involved extremely convoluted epicycle theories of interpolation and other things. They have a whole reconstructed version of the letters in order to get them to be forgeries, or otherwise fanciful theories as to how they were forged or why. To me, the main point is that the letters clearly were written by someone for whom the temple is still standing and still an issue, and there's no war that he has to deal with in the past or ongoing, and the letters are stitched together. This is another thing, is that the letters are clearly a bunch of letters that have been sewn together. If you're forging, say for example, 2 Corinthians, you don't forge it that way. You would just forge one coherent letter. The fact that you had to take a bunch of pieces and put them together and cut pieces out and stuff tells you that whoever's editing this into the New Testament is working with the real dossier, and they're fixing it, quote unquote. Forgers don't have to fix their own work. They would just forge what they wanted. And we see this in the pastorals. Pastorals are perfect examples of forged letters. They're coherent, they totally make sense in their context, and so on. So one thing we can say is that the 7 letters that are authentic were written by the same person, and they were probably written before the Jewish War. And so whether the name of the author was Paul is kind of almost irrelevant, what their name was. But that's the name that's on them. There's no reason to doubt it. So
yeah, unless you give me a reason. And by the way, Music, I did a show with Dennis and Carrier on this, where we went, I think, 20-something minutes probably long in discussing this specific thing. And so you already kind of discussed this, and I'm looking forward to releasing that onto the Patreon. So, but if you're wanting to know, like right now, go to richardcarrier. Is it info?
richardcarrier.info. You can get all my stuff there. My Patreon, my Facebook, my Twitter, my classes, if you want to take my online classes. All of that, and my books and my articles and everything.
Yeah, and you could search this specific thing.
That's right.
Are they authentic? Thank you for that super chat. Mr. Monster asks, and I'd love to get both of your thoughts, why do we think Jesus was white? Thanks for the super chat.
Well, he wasn't white.
I know.
I want to quote W.E.B. Du Bois here again, or I'm sorry, Du Bois, to pronounce it the way he would. Before the age of exploration, there were no white people. The entire concept of white people was not invented until African slavery was originated by the colonial powers, the colonial empires of Europe.
So this is anachronistic.
Yeah, you had ethnicities. So you'd have Germans and Portuguese, and if you go further back, you have Greeks and Romans and stuff. But the idea of identifying people by color did not exist until Africanized slavery happened, when the white people who started calling themselves white to distinguish themselves and unify against the people that they were subjugating into antebellum slavery.
So simply put, though, I think the question is kind of a deeper question he's trying to say, and it's not like he's really trying to know like why Jesus is really white. He's saying like, why do white people think Jesus is white? This goes into
if you go to every culture, Jesus is their color.
Yep.
So
I've seen Afro, the dreadlock
which
Jesus.
Which just tells you the paintings of Jesus, that is a mythical Jesus. Everybody agrees.
Yeah. Everyone agrees with a mythical Jesus to some degree.
He's rarely even correctly portrayed the way a Jew would be at that time too, the way they would style themselves. But
right. Thanks for the question, man. I appreciate it. All right, we have no more super chats. This was my question. I wanted to get it raw. I want the feelings flowing. I want the lovey-dovey.
Uh-huh.
We've gone hard all week, so it's good to get into emotions and chill. All right. It takes a lot to surprise you. I've noticed this because you've read so much damn shit. I
That's
couldn't
true,
begin
yeah.
to.
I'll take the Scotch, man.
Decades, yeah.
Yeah.
If I'm going to have to endure this.
Oh, really? Oh, thanks a lot, man.
No, not you. I have to hear him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's got decades on me on this accumulated knowledge business.
I gotta get them seeing and pouring this. This is fun.
This is for you, pal.
All right, I'll kill it.
Go ahead and kill it. I'm watching you pour. But you've read so much, it's difficult to shock you or to get you like wowed in like an intense way. For me, it's not that hard. If you show me something and I'm like, I didn't know that. Holy crap! I'm pretty excited about
Well, I
it.
have to know, like that's happened to me too. It's just happened to me decades ago.
That's
so
true.
A lot of this stuff.
That's true.
It still happens. It still happens from time to time.
Well,
It's
then
not
I'm trying to probe into what we did today, for example, on Dennis's work. For me, I read his work, read a couple of his books, and was like, whoa, I was convinced. Then I interview 100 other scholars who aren't convinced, and I ask about his work. I ask scholars like him about other people's work, things like that. I do that all the time.
That's cool.
So when I first read it, I was like, whoa. Then later on, I'm like, you get away from it for a while, you think of so much other stuff, you don't even know how serious it is. And then this trip happened, and we did this literal close-up. I'm asking you, because I know I'm convinced. How did you feel about the data when we did these few walkthrough shows where we like the more concrete evidence?
So I wasn't surprised by it because, frankly, I had that eureka moment when I read the first book that he produced on this, which is Homer and the Gospel of Mark. And that I was like, this is genius. Like, I'm amazed that he saw all this stuff, and the organization and the methodology. All of that was just like a eureka moment for me. That was fantastic. So I've been aware of this, and I've kept up with a lot of his work since then. So I'm not surprised by all this. What gives me the warm fuzzies and makes me feel really good is like the way that this new synopsis, that he's organized it, the way that he's put everything in it. So it's such an extremely useful tool, whether you agree with him or not. And so that which is exactly the kind of thing I want more scholars to produce, that kind of stuff, so that you can actually analyze the argument, and it's a wealth of information regardless of what you do with the thesis. And then at the same time, it's a great tool for arguing for the thesis. And if you want to argue against it, it is a necessary tool for you to engage with.
So, point blank, direct question is, are you convinced of his thesis? I'm not talking Q, I'm talking Mimesis.
Oh, Mimesis theory, absolutely. And in fact, we've done some videos, people will see.
I'm just
where even my doubts are the same doubts that Dennis himself would admit to. Is the idea like there are strong cases and weak cases, but the strong cases lend support to the weak cases. And there's always going to be, at the bottom, like there's cases where you're not entirely sure, but the other stuff kind of lends it credibility. But that doesn't matter. Like if the question is, are they doing this? That's indisputable. I can't think anyone who doubts this is happening is clearly not engaging with the work and not actually reading it. So.
That's what I'm talking about.
But I want to spin out of it. I mean, it's very, very kind. But in my own work, I had one eureka after another. So I too
that's evident. Yeah, I can see. I would too if I were.
I too was surprised. But I want to spin out of this into your viewership. There is nothing more exciting in my life than intellectual curiosity and discovery. And I can see this in Richard's work over and over and over again. He is truly a Renaissance person and a polymath. And I would think that he and I share an experience of intellectual curiosity and the thrill of discovery, and then having to back off of the discovery a little bit to rationalize it, continue
test
it, go on the journey, and it's it's intoxicating.
Yeah,
love
that's
it.
true. It is fun. Yeah,
And I think one of the things that your viewers are showing us is that they have their own intellectual curiosity, and maybe we can be a part of eurekas for them. But the life that's unexamined is not worth living. I wish that I was the one that designed that saying. But this notion of curiosity and discovery is life-giving. But it doesn't happen unless you can be a skeptic. You have to be willing to take risks and to say, I need my mind to go in places that are new, and I'm going to try to discipline them so I don't become a kook. But on the other hand, and by the way, that's the way to avoid becoming a kook, is to be skeptical of yourself.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate what Richard said. I certainly learned from him as much as he learned from me. But this is an invitation, from my perspective, it's an invitation to younger people to not give up on curiosity, skepticism, and discipline, because it really is a rewarding life.
So I've got people trying to troll, and I need to make a few people
Yeah, you've been
give them
exposing
wrenches.
people. This is weird trolling too. I don't even get it.
Yeah, I don't either. What do you see on your side?
Well, I see the person who is trying to break the rules by naming themselves. It's okay to hit women so that their message gets deleted, but they still get their message through. That's such shady shit that I would totally expel them.
Yeah, I'm trying, and I'm gonna have to make some people some of my friends
There he is
here.
again.
Yeah,
This has to be some 13-year-old kid. There's no way any sane adult would behave like this.
they're idiots. That's what it
Yeah.
is. Lame. Yeah, I am taking super chats. The one way I could do it is if they bared with me for a second and I bounce out real quick and make a couple of these guys here wrenches. Bear with me, chat. Just wait. Hopefully we didn't even get all that anyway because it's a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah. No, it was just a waste of time.
Okay. And Dr. Carrier, I've seen your video and I've read Carrier's blog, but I still don't understand what Israel-only people believe. Oh my gosh, are they Christians? Can you briefly explain what they're preaching?
I share your confusion. Yeah. No, I have a hard time figuring out what they believe too, because they're slippery. They're like little weasels. They slip around from place to place, and they'll claim one thing and do another, and I don't know. And there's different ones too. So they different IO folks might believe different things. I don't know. So it's very frustrating for me. I would prefer someone to just be straightforward and stick to a lane.
They're writing a book, by the way,
Okay.
and they're supposedly it's like with everything, the appendix and everything's like 600 something pages, supposedly.
Sure. Okay.
Me and Steven have our own opinions on what we think is going to come out of this, and it's you kind of get where I'm going with this.
Normally I would say, sure, let them go get it peer reviewed, but I don't wish that on any peer reviewer. So.
No kidding. That'd be torture.
Thank you, Cade. So pretty much what they believe, if I could just wrap it in like a quick, to the point, their entire theory is that God, when he promised Abraham, and this is the presup, right? They go to Abraham, Genesis 12, Genesis 15, 16, or 17, one of the two. It's a repeat because you have the documentary hypothesis, but none of them know what that is. And he promises that, your seed, Abraham's seed, will become a multitude of nations. So ultimately, when you jump ahead, like this idea that in your seed all the nations will be blessed.
I'm trying to follow you here. All right.
You get to Genesis 49 or 48, and it talks about Joseph's two children, and here you have who's I can't even think right now. Anyways, he crisscrosses his hands, blesses them, and he says, "Your seed will be a multitude of nations." It's another promise of your children, right?
Yeah.
They go to the Gentiles, since this term for nations is used in Hebrew, and they see Paul preaching to the Gentiles. These Gentiles in the last days are the regathering of Abraham's seed promised back in Genesis.
Sure. Uh-huh.
So in a nutshell, everything is in that vein.
Now that actually is a completely different... See, that would be different, right? Because Abraham is pre-tribes.
Yes.
So you could say that theoretically they believed everyone was the seed of Abraham. Like, that's not impossible, but that they believe that. But we have no evidence that they believe that.
Right.
And it's not the same thing as being the tribes of Israel. So that's nonsensical. I don't really know what to do with that.
Cade, email me if you want to know more. I really appreciate all your support and all these super chats that you do give. Like, I would be more than happy to spend some more personal time with you and explain to you. I can give you actual arguments they make. I'm not sure if you want to waste your time going through
For the
all of
IO
it.
people, yeah.
Yes.
Well, I have an article on it if they don't know. I don't know if this person...
Yeah, she said that they've read it. So
okay, yeah.
the thing is it's even more confusing once
Correct.
you've read it, and if you go to listen to what they say, it's like... It's complex because not all of them...
It's whack-a-mole, right? Because you say one thing and then they shift their position to another thing. And then once you attack that thing, then they shift back to the previous position as if nothing has changed. Yeah,
and you don't understand their position, so that's the problem. You can never pin it down. But I'm hoping the book comes out and it's pretty solid on what they believe. At least we know that.
Yeah, let's hope they learn something.
Indo says, take a shot, Derek. Trust me when I tell you no one wants me to take a shot.
Oh, no.
So, a little personal here.
Besides, we don't have anything to shoot.
I don't drink anymore. It's almost been 7 years since I've had any alcohol. I did have one beer while I was on heroin, but it was like piss water to me, and it didn't taste good. And so that tells you a little bit, probably a lot of TMI right there. You know what I mean? But yeah, look, I wish I knew how to be a normal person and not. But if you see how extreme I am as I am this way, imagine how I
don't. I do not censure that at all. There's nothing wrong with that.
But yeah, I appreciate the love. I did take a shot of sparkling water, and it's empty now. So
quite a shot, a mega shot,
a whole glass shot. Thank you, man, for that super chat. Gnostic Informant, thank you for the super chat. He said, just purchased Luke and Virgil. I'm 1/3 through Historicity of Jesus by Carrier, so Luke and Virgil's on deck. Well, listen, I got a surprise for you, my friend, because Gnostic Informant has a channel he's been developing. He interviewed me. Mm-hmm. I'm going to hook you up with grandfather Dennis MacDonald here, because he'd be happy to present his views and come onto your channel. He's a very good interviewer. Yeah. I mean, I'm telling you, very, very good. And someone else who's seen me interview other people said that his interview of the person was better than my interview with him. So that tells you he's good.
Cool.
Thank you for the super chat, bro. I'm going to have to hook you up with these guys. Nowhere Man, what is the mimesis origin of Jesus in Gethsemane, especially the remove this cup from me dialogue?
Oh, interesting. Do you have a
Is there something from
thing on that?
Yes, there is.
There's always something, yes.
But the idea that cup is identified with death is more Socratic than it is Homeric. And of course, in the Phaedo of Plato, Socrates is surrounded by a few of his disciples, if you will, and he takes the cup of hemlock, which is a cup of death, and there are a number of affinities with that scene of the Last Supper and with the Gethsemane episode that deserve a Socratic reading. It becomes even more obvious in Luke. But in I'm going to tell you a story from Homer, and you tell me if you see any similarities between these.
Okay.
Odysseus has been spending a year on the island of Circe, having a very good time in her bedroom, and his crew have been having fun with the ladies on the island as well, but they get tired of it. So they want to go home. Well, Circe gives them a big feast, and everybody gets drunk and gets a good night's sleep, including a young man named Elpenor. And Elpenor has a drunk. He's a young man. He's been an oarsman and a soldier. And he wants to get a good night's sleep on the roof of Circe's palace because he needs the fresh air and the coolness of the evening. Well, Odysseus goes into Circe's bedroom, and he thinks in the morning she's going to send him off home to Ithaca. And she says, I got bad news for you. You have to go to Hades first and consult with the soul of blind Tiresias, because he's the one who can give you information about how safely to get home. And then Homer says that Odysseus was sorrowful unto death. And of course, it's the irony that he's about to go to Hades, but he's sorrowful unto death. He wants to die.
Wow.
Well, the visit to Hades is a kind of trope, a substitute for death.
Wow.
So he decides that nonetheless he's going to go. So he calls his men together and says, let's be going. And they think they're going home. But they actually have to go to Hades. Elpenor hears the call to muster, but he forgets he's on the roof of Circe, and he falls to his death, and he breaks his neck. And so when Odysseus doesn't realize he's missing this sailor. So he gets to the shores of Hades, and the first soul to meet him is that of Elpenor. And he says, Elpenor, how the heck did you get here, you poor man? And he says, well, my neck broke and my soul got here, and if you don't go back to Circe's island and bury me, I'll never be able to get entrance into Hades. So Odysseus wants to get home, but he's agreed to go back to Circe's island and bury this guy. So then Odysseus goes to Hades and comes back successfully and comes home. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus has a Last Supper with his disciples, and he tells them that what's going to happen, and then he goes to the garden and has an arrest. Well, there's a young man who is there and flees with the disciples, and he was wearing nothing but a linen garment about him, and he flees, so Jesus has to face his fate alone. This young man in ancient literature is depicted nude, and he's the Elpenor-like character. There are other similarities between this Last Supper of Odysseus with Circe and the Last Supper in Gethsemane, and so that's the answer I would give you. The fuller answer, though, is actually more interesting, and you can find that in several of my books.
Yeah, he goes deep, and we already got a recording too with this particular topic with him and Richard. Thanks for that question. I got to catch up. We got quite a few super chats here. Tapora K, thank you for the super chat. What do you think of Jesus being a cynic philosopher from a Jewish Hellenistic city, Galilee, which was amongst the Decapolis, 10 Greek cities, and Jesus being the wise sage from the... I'm looking for your follow-up here. Oh, snap, it refreshed.
But it's a reference to the question about the cynic hypothesis.
Yeah, that's pretty much it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have some bibliography in it in my book. I mean, it's one of many things that have been argued. It's possible there's influence of cynic philosophy, but it could, whether it's influence on Jesus or influence on the authors, or influence on Judaism a century before any of this happened, right? So it's hard to trace causal sequence, or if they're parallel developments. That's another thing.
Just something to keep in mind, and I know you want to comment here.
No, he's right.
Okay, so you're on the same page. Okay, can you check and see on your side, Tempora K was a super chat, what the next super chat was? Because my thing refreshed, and we had so many come through and so many comments.
Let's see if I can find it.
Did you find Tempora K?
Let's see, Mark Smith. About snakes again. Hold on.
Sorry, bear with us, please.
Jesus being a cynic philosopher.
Okay.
We did that.
What's the next one?
After that one?
Yep. The next color. Because I have Mr. Monster. That's.
Mark Smith asks.
Okay. Ask it out loud if you don't mind, please.
Yeah. Does the combination of the magic snake and the magic wand, he's very interested in the magic wand and the magic snake, predate the stories of Moses? The Assyrians had a god, Ningishzida. I'm probably mispronouncing that. With magic snakes, trees, vines, and libation, but not wands. Well, that's something you should ask an expert on Mesopotamian, early Mesopotamian history. Again, Wikipedia has an article on the. I can't remember if it was which one. Yeah, that did touch on some of this and might have a bibliography to pursue, but this is really a question to ask someone who's, and you're a Assyriologist, for example, which you've interviewed once.
Yeah, Dr. Joshua Bowen. So I could ask
Bowen,
that question.
If he doesn't know, he'll know where you can find out.
Yeah. So do me a favor, especially if you're asking that question, email me, derek@mythvisionpodcast.com. What's the next one that you have on the list?
From Mr. Monster.
All right, I believe Revelations, right?
I believe Revelations. It's Revelation, but
Yep.
it's the book.
What is a wartime novel meant for an audience of its time and has no bearing on our time or our future? Would you agree? 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't written for now, obviously.
It's definitely about Donald Trump. No, I'm just kidding.
It's definitely about the Roman Empire and the era of Domitian.
And it may have been written
Credit
by someone
cards.
with PTSD.
Yeah.
Which I think is that we cover in one.
Yeah, we do. And Mr. Monster, I think you're on the Patreon, but we go extensive into Revelation in one of those videos, and you go into this and cover it. We have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But yes, we all agree that it was absolutely not for anything past, or it's not talking about anything around our
Nowhere
time.
later than the 2nd century, it's not referring to,
Yeah, nothing. And I mean, there's disputes over, like, is this a 70 AD or 90 something, depending on if you're talking to a preterist fundamentalist or something or not.
I want to say, though, that doesn't mean that the book shouldn't be written and interpreted. Read and interpreted.
Right. It's just not about credit cards and, like, cell phones.
It tells us things about the author, about the era, the community he's writing about.
Politics in Asia Minor.
Right. It tells us things about the economy. It tells us there's a lot of data in there about the ancient world. If you would just take it seriously for what it is, rather than try to turn it into something else.
Yeah.
And people keep doing that, doing it throughout history. We got an interesting question here. I don't know how you would maybe answer this. Aaron Adair says, "What do you consider a strong example
Hi, Aaron.
Hello. Do you know them?
Aaron Adair is an astronomer who wrote the best book on the Bethlehem Star ever done. So I would highly recommend folks to check it out.
Cool.
Yeah, I can't remember the title, but just look for his name, Aaron
I've
Adair.
seen the name,
Yeah,
Okay, do you think this is really him?
Super informed. I hope.
That'd be awesome.
It would be weird if someone's pretending to be Aaron Adair.
Yeah, what do you... No, that's interesting. What do you consider... Because this is a pretty complex question even.
Yeah.
What do you consider a strong example of mimesis of Homer and or Virgil in G. Matthew, not copied over from Mark?
In other words, did Matthew do some Homeric mimesis that he didn't borrow from Mark?
There's only one compelling example. But the very fact that Matthew includes so much of Mark that has Homeric influence should be taken into account. When in book 24, Priam needs to rescue the body, I'll be brief, rescue the body of Hector. And Zeus sees what a dangerous mission this is, because here an old man is going with a treasure of ransom in the middle of the night into the enemy territory that had just killed not only his son, but many of his sons in the war. And it's an incredibly dangerous journey. So Hermes comes and is going to escort him into the camp of Achilles. And to do so, he puts the guards to sleep. He throws back the bolts of the bivouac and allows Priam to offer the ransom and to take his son. When they come out, they also go through these open doors and sleeping guards, and then Hermes leaves. Hermes is called an angelos of Zeus. He's an angel of Zeus. What we find in the Gospel of Mark is an unusual narrative about guards at the tomb who then fall asleep, are stricken like dead men when Jesus comes out of the tomb. That is, the tomb is open, the guards are put to sleep, and the words for guards and for the door are exactly the same as you have in Homer. Another reason for saying that is a Homeric imitation is we have pagan, Jewish, and Christian imitations going from as early as the 2nd century BCE to at least the 4th century Common Era in multiple. So this idea of putting guards to sleep or killing them and so on and pulling back releasing someone from a prison or a house or a tomb, and so on. And the report of the guards is a trope that has Homeric imitation. Now here's a methodological challenge. Because we have so many examples of this story, we can't be sure that Matthew is using Homer.
Right.
Because Matthew could be using the story of Artapanus, where Artapanus escapes a prison. Moses escapes a prison in Egypt in very similar way. Mm. So this is an example where, when mimesis becomes so pervasive in a culture, you really can't be sure which model is being used. But I'd still say that the most likely one is the most famous one, namely the Hermes putting guards to sleep and pulling back the doors.
And that's interesting because that explains added details. So we've been talking in the videos about eclectic mimesis, how it was actually taught that it's actually more creative and more impressive if you can merge multiple emulations into one. And so I find, of course, in Proving History, I give an example of Daniel in the Lion's Den has a lot of influence on the guard story in Matthew. But the details that Dennis just references are the ones that don't come from Daniel specifically. And so there's some overlap, but not a lot. So if you look at the Daniel and the Lion's Den influence and then look at this Homeric or otherwise influence, put those together, you almost get the whole story. If you combine Mark in there as well, right?
And so, I've been noticing that too.
Yeah.
I need your help again. It's refreshing. Okay. And I am so we're at Aaron Adair, right? I see Matthew pop. That's how far down it refreshed to me. So how far up can you go to? Yeah. Can you get to Aaron Adair and then go to the one below that?
I only have 10% battery left, FYI. But no. Next is Judas Priest. Does either Richard or Dennis know much about King David? Do they believe he existed as stated in the Bible? How about the size of his army? Possibly 288,000. By the way, sound went south. There was some there. I in the chat. There was some.
Yeah, I was looking at that too. I don't know if it was like an internet thing or whatever, but I will let everyone know watching. We are recording.
Independent recording, so it's
yes. So it will be on Patreon, and all of this will be in like really high quality. But okay.
I mean, very briefly, I'm undecided about David. There's arguments pro and con. There is some early archaeological evidence of a possible House of David as kind of like a warlord thing. 288,000 seems extremely unlikely. The logistics of maintaining an army that size are outrageous, basically.
Oh, there may have been a King David, but he certainly was not a king of an empire.
Right.
Thank you. What was the next one?
I'm waiting. I'm going to see. Hold on.
I am at Matthew Pop. I think I'm saying that right.
I see Thomas Thurn here. Is that later?
That might be later. It might have refreshed on you too. That's the crazy thing.
I can still draw it up. It just takes time.
I'm at Matthew Pop. So is there one above him?
Maybe.
That we didn't get?
You're Matthew Pop. Could Jesus have been a member of the Sanhedrin?
Yeah, I got that, but I didn't know if there was one above that I missed.
Could Jesus? I mean, anything's possible. It's doubtful that Jesus was a member of the Sanhedrin.
You don't see it even likely?
It doesn't seem likely. I guess I should say, crossover maniac. How does the historicity of Jesus compare with the historicity of legendary figures like King Arthur and Robin Hood? I don't know about Robin Hood, but I actually cover King Arthur in my book. On the historicity of Jesus, I cite the bibliography on that. The consensus in the field of King Arthur studies, the majority consensus is that there's no historical Arthur. The legends of Arthur are actually an amalgam of several people over many centuries of time. So I have more opposite comparisons, which are ancient people.
That's right. That's important.
In Jesus from Outer Space, I have a whole chapter where I cover Spartacus, Hannibal, Pontius Pilate, Herod Antipas, and so on, showing what kinds of evidence we have. And Socrates, I have him covered. So I go through the kinds of evidence we have for them and that we don't have for Jesus, if you want a comparison.
Okay. I've got another super chat. I'm making sure it's the next one because I'm on my phone. If I was on my computer at home, we wouldn't be having this problem. Thomas Thurnier, I hope I'm saying that right. Could it be that the myths and endless genealogies of 1 Timothy 1 are a reference to an early gospel?
Do you know what that's a reference to?
No.
Well, in 1 Timothy, they're condemning, don't pay attention to myths and endless genealogies. Apparently people are making these up. I mean, it might be. I'm not really sure. It's hard to really guess. The only thing I can say about that, well, first of all, 1 Timothy is a forgery, so it's kind of ironic of a forger trying to complain about forgeries. But
I do actually have an answer for that one. The word mythos can mean simply tale or a story.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything that's false, but in this case the author doesn't like the story. And in the context in 1 Timothy, it could be that he doesn't like the story of Thecla, who is authorized to teach the Word of God in the Acts of
that's a good
in
point.
the Acts of Paul.
There's a reason why he's saying this, but 1 Timothy's also got the misogynist passage in it. So
That's right. And I wrote the first published book that I had was in fact on this, that included this topic, the legend and the apostle. And this text was important to me because I think the author knows of myths or stories about Paul that he feels are inappropriate. And so the name of the book is The Legend, that is, the legend of Paul that you find in the Acts of Paul, and the apostle, which would say that 1 Timothy is a forgery in part to correct the image of Paul as being a friend of women.
Oh.
There's one thing that we've not covered at all, and I just want to enter it in as a topic for us to consider. There is a branch of study of mythologizing in our world that's called fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a science now in popular culture studies. And many of the things that we find in fan fiction, and by the way, fan fiction can be either of historical or non-historical characters. But you have gatekeepers, you have apocrypha, you have rival interpretations, and so on.
you have canonicity, and yeah.
That's right. So this business about mythologizing historical or non-historical characters really can be analyzed today in terms of how fan fiction works.
Thank you very much. I'm going to get this next super chat popped up so I don't get like a refresh and then I don't have it or something.
Sure, yeah.
But I do want to restart the video. All right, that one's fixed.
I see either Cade or Cade. Welly?
It's Cade. I think it's Cade. Yep.
Cade Welly asks, did the ancient world only have red wines? Is it possible they could have been sipping on, what is this?
A Pinot Grigio.
Pinot Grigio.
I don't know when white wine was invented. White wine is wine with the grapes peeled. So the skins of the grapes are not in there, and it creates a different effect. I think that was a much later development. I don't know when it was developed, but it wasn't an ancient world thing.
The color of wine is also determined by how long the skin of the grape is kept in the process.
Right, yeah.
So that's another variable.
Yeah, ancient wine was sweeter than the wine that we recognize today, and would be considered by oenophiles gross by comparison. So the interesting refined dry wines that we have from like France and Italy and stuff later is all developed using technologies that were developed after the Roman period. So,
and what would it mean that we have the wine dark sea if we have white wine?
Jesse, thanks for the super chat. What is your opinion? And we had this question yesterday, so I'm asking it anyway for repetition. What is your opinion of Herman Dettering's view, which dates the Pauline corpus to the 2nd century?
okay, I got an article on it, Historicity of Paul. Check it out on my blog.
You take a deep dive?
Yeah, I mean, not a deep dive, but I give reasons why it's not believable. But yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And you both agree. Thank you. I am Stokie Wartooth. I hope I'm saying that right. Lost, was Richard or Dennis know much about King David? Do they believe he existed?
Oh, we did that one
in the Bible. Okay, well that was the same question that Dudas Priest asked. So
is it really?
repetition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, weird. Okay.
Okay.
So hey, we answered that. Thank you. I appreciate the love a dub. Skip Bosco, Dennis, Clawhammer, ? Scruggs, ? Other, ? And Richard, do you play an instrument?
I don't. I'm not musical. I'm tone deaf, so not my area.
I play a 5-string banjo and am involved with several different musical groups. My favorite genres are bluegrass and Irish pub music.
What is clawhammer and scruggs?
Oh, those are two major different ways of playing a banjo.
Okay.
Clawhammer is kind of your old southern prior to bluegrass.
Okay.
Bluegrass is a 3-finger picking method, whereas clawhammer is without picks, and it's based on a downward motion on the right hand, whereas Scruggs perfected and really perfected the 3-finger method.
Where do you
I'm a
fall?
3-finger picker.
Okay. Awesome. Skip, good question. Interesting question.
Yeah, that's
It's, like,
awesome.
really
I love
cool.
that one.
Yeah, I like sometimes, I like getting deep.
People who
and
know
then
stuff
come
and
back
ask interesting side
to, what
questions.
color
yeah.
dog do you own?
Right.
I'm just kidding. To give you a long week's break. Tempora K, thank you for the super chat. What does Mr. MacDonald and Mr. Carrier think on the Green Book by Mr. Gamirkin? If they're not familiar with his work, can you, Derek, explain his findings and touch on the Green Book and Plato and Timaeus? Oh, wow. That's a lot to touch on. So, all right, I thought he was a minimalist. He's not quite a minimalist. He believes that, so pretty much he believes this. The Septuagint was obviously finalized in Greek in, 273 BC.
This is the argument that it's heavily influenced by Plato.
There
et
is the
cetera.
Platonic
Right.
connections, of course, and he's not saying everything is, but the final redaction in, if you will, the Septuagint's creation, he thinks the Hebrew development, the canonical Hebrew, was actually developed sometime within a decade prior to. So a decade or two prior to the LXX, but that doesn't mean there isn't source material in locations potentially.
Yeah, I haven't read the book, so I can't really give a proper evaluation. So don't take this as gospel or anything. But I did read some articles that were pro and con, debate basically, and I wasn't impressed with the evidence that Merkin was presenting. It's a lot of leaps of logic, I find, and so maybe that's wrong. Maybe it'll hold up in final analysis. And since it's not a subject that's terribly within my field or interest.
Right.
I haven't done the deep dive, so I can't properly say that it's bogus. It might hold up, but I haven't seen anything that's impressed me from that yet.
Yeah, he gets into some of these details. I don't know the history well. It sounds really cool, the things he mentions. Like, he's going into sources I don't know.
Right, yeah.
And like, the lack of evidence of extra-biblical, like, no one understands the narrative of Moses. It's really weird, because, like, Greek literature, they're talking about Moses is compared to this priest from Egypt who escapes, which gets in the weird Hyksos.
Yeah, that's why it seems like a big stretch on scant data. I don't know.
Well, he's saying the lack of it. He's like, he comes up with like more of an empirical approach, and he's like, we don't hear it or see it anywhere, and we've got elephantine papyrus that don't even mention.
Yeah, that's not even a valid argument from silence. That's the kind of thing that bothers me. Like, when I look at that, it makes me be skeptical, because when you're making arguments about the silence of the historical record, when we know almost all documents are lost, that's not a sound way to argue. And if someone doesn't know that's not a sound way to argue, that always makes me doubt that they've got a good argument for the rest of it. So like I said, but I don't want to claim that I have actually fully vetted his work, so I can't say that it's false.
Never read his work, so.
Yeah.
Well, but I know about the Septuagint.
Yeah, of course.
And one of the issues is that we don't have a complete Septuagint that we know of that is prior to the New Testament. What we have is Old Greek, and we have the collections of books, in many cases only by themselves, but we then have a canonical process going on in the Hebrew Bible because of the Septuagint. So I think the skepticism that I would have is similar to the one that Richard mentioned, but the one problem is, when do we date the Septuagint? Because we actually don't know when the Septuagint came to final form.
Even apart from legends, right? We've got legends, right?
70 men came.
Well, and that's right. I mean, we have the the letter of Aristeas that talks about it. So I would just like to see how he wants to date this material, how widespread, this actual corpus of the Septuagint. Now, the Septuagint's relative canonization in Judaism is a very important topic, and it's very complex. And you have to really get into the weeds of Hebrew and Dead Sea Scrolls and the various recensions of the early Greek tradition, which is called Kaiges sometimes, and so on. So I know about the complexities. That said, I really am not in a position to comment on this topic, but I am saying it is a vexed topic.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
Appreciate
that's
that.
accurate.
Thank you for that, Tempora. Cade, you seriously rock. I mean, you just keep coming through and helping out and super chatting. I really appreciate you, seriously. Will you email me if you have any questions? I'd like to get some questions recorded with your name, asking them in high definition. In future interviews for all your support. I feel like I have to try and at least show you some love some way. This question is to Dennis. If Odysseus is supposed to be so smart and clever, why does he make so many stupid decisions? Did being a hero in the ancient world mean something different than being a hero today?
Yes, it meant something very different. All ancient heroes are flawed characters, which makes them so damn interesting. Think about Achilles. Achilles is a madman from the very first lines of the Iliad, and yet he is the Lord of the Dead in Hades in the Odyssey, and he is petulant and he's murderous, and he has to be brought into human sensitivity in the Iliad so that by the end he's kind enough to release Hector's body to his father. And this is a huge transition in his character. And Homer knows that. Odysseus is not virtuous. He's a skunk. He's understood to be, he creates the Trojan horse, and that's a kill, that brings down Troy. He lies frequently. He sleeps, he's either get home, but he sleeps with women along the way.
Yeah.
He is duplicitous. So what
and there's
makes...
also a theme of too smart for your own good. There's a lot of that.
Okay.
Because he was asking about the stupid decisions Odysseus makes.
Right.
But if you really read them, they're not necessarily stupid. They're just clever by too far, right? You know what I mean? Like he thinks he's being clever, but he has an overestimation of how anticipating he
Heracles is a drunk thug.
Right.
And he sleeps with goddesses or almost anything that moves. So what makes the characters we remember best from antiquity are flawed characters, which makes them rounded and interesting and like us.
So I did this.
But the difference is Hector. Hector is almost the perfect example of the Greek hero. He loves his family. He defends his country. He's willing to die, even though his brother Paris is a total jerk and has taken Helen from her husband and is causing the Trojan War and is a big wimp. So he is noble. He's really the archetypal good guy hero. And by the way, he's a model for the death of Jesus, which I don't think is accidental.
Yeah, we
that you have. We have that
Yeah.
example.
Yeah,
but
that's recorded.
Odysseus is more of a skunk than he is a hero. But he loves his family, and he shows great endurance. And he, like Jesus, suffers many things and is smarter and more courageous than his companions. So it's a great question, and there's a huge literature on this of Homeric heroes and other heroes in the Greek world.
So Cade has another question, and I just wanted to say this. When I did this series on Joseph Smith, early Mormonism, right? And I don't know what happened. Some magic actually happened. You may not feel the way I felt about this, but we did 25 episodes hour long on this whole thing, going back to when he was born, how there were 9 to 11 people in one house, all this stuff. And as a kid, he was into weird stuff, and he was just really outspoken. He was the youngest one, and he gets what he wants, all this stuff. He's a little brat. And then later on, he gets in trouble for things. He's doing things as con artist type stuff, but he's such a charismatic character. He's convincing people. He walks up to one guy and goes, God has told me that a man would come today and he prophesied that great fortunes would come upon him if he had given me $50. Something to this.
Yeah, right, yeah.
The guy gives him $50. Next thing you know, he's in cahoots and he believes Joseph Smith and he's a bullshit artist. But I fell in love with him. I'm not even kidding you. He's the last guy you'd be like, this is a good guy. I totally know. He's a horrible, horrible guy. I get it. But I was like eager to know his death's coming, and I was like, no, don't die. Like it was the weirdest series. I don't know how to describe it. So Cade says...
It's funny. It sounds like Wednesday, Odin in American Gods is a lot like this. But anyway.
It's just weird. And Cade says, I watched the movie Troy. Have you seen the movie Troy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that the one with Brad Pitt?
Yes.
Okay.
And wasn't a fan. Do you think someone could make a kick-ass Odyssey movie? If so, what would they need to include or exclude?
So Troy was done as a film, and they interpreted it mostly as realpolitik. Like they tried to make a real, like, what if this really happened? There was the TV show. What was the TV show called? That I thought was better. There was a TV show where they had the actual gods involved. Like gods were actually doing things and were actually drivers of the plot, which is much more like what actually happens in Homer. There was a TV show. I can't remember what it was called. That was better. I would actually recommend watching the TV show. But even that still wasn't like a, let's make a theatrical production of Homer. No one's done that. I think there was one really terrible TV show that tried it, and it was... The special effects are so horrible and the acting was terrible and I just couldn't tolerate it. That was Armand Assante, I think, was playing Odysseus in that one. But that was the Odyssey, not the Iliad. But no, I would like to see someone do it, like with Ridley Scott style production values, and portray it the way Homer portrays it. The gods do the things that they actually do. Don't try to turn it into realpolitik. Like turn it into like just the way it's sung. Portray it. You know what I mean? Do a Harry Potter on it, right?
Well,
just make it.
Game of Thrones caught a lot of crap for all of the like sexual scenes. You're like, oh no, that actually.
And the violence, like Homer is so graphically descriptive of wounds and death and stuff. You would have to preserve that if you want to really. So like the best version of this would be one that aesthetically impresses you with the same feelings and pathos. We've been talking about that. And impact that Homer himself or the rhapsodes who are singing Homer intend by singing the play. Like so that's what I would like to see done. No one's done it.
Okay, but the question is about the Odyssey, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Should we do it? What I think.
Well,
would
actually,
be best,
Iliad, because he said Troy, but
no, at the beginning. But it said, should somebody do a movie?
Oh, he said Odyssey.
Of the Odyssey.
Right, those are two different things. Yeah.
If I were a cinematographer, which I of course am not, I would say the best genre for it would be a miniseries. And I can tell you why I say that. The classicists often rightly divide the Odyssey in not just by its books, but by its episodes. So the first 4 books have to do with Telemachus. You could deal with that in a miniseries in an hour-and-a-half presentation.
I think so too. Yeah.
Then you can get to book 5, which is the shipwreck and his landing with the Phaeacians, and that's called the Fiaca, and the Naufrage, in German, the shipwreck, and that takes you from books 5 through 8. Books 9 to 12 are the adventures at sea. And you could do that as another hour-and-a-half miniseries thing. Then you have a section that goes from book 13 to about 21. And this is Odysseus being back among the suitors and connecting with Telemachus and his colleagues. Then you have the slaying of the suitors and the resolution of the story. So the Odyssey is made for a miniseries. You could have 4, let's say 1 hour, 1.5 hour segments, simply following the storyline of the Odyssey, And it's full of adventure, it's full of sex, it's full of longing, it's full of courage.
Right.
It's cool. It has its own recognition. You could do it almost as a Greek tragedy in 5 stages.
Thank you. Judas Priest says, got an early Skins game tomorrow. Enjoyed the evening. Thanks, Derek, Dennis, and Richard. And try not to delete this one, Derek. Well, let me tell you, brother, I appreciate that, and I'm not going to delete this one. It will not delete on YouTube, and it will not be deleted even if that happened, because I've got it on 2 different cameras, high definition. So if something happens then you know there's a curse or something happened. I don't know. It can't be true.
Yeah, multiple redundancies.
Right? Read Between the Lives says, for now, Stephen Fry's audio performance is the bar to strive for. Theater in the head.
I don't know it, but anything by Stephen Fry is probably good. So
Interesting. Someone says Stephen Fry's series is wonderful. All right, Tempora K. This is going to be the last one, guys, and then I want you guys to plug. So I really appreciate all the super chats, everyone's support, obviously having these wonderful scholars. Tempora K says, is Christianity Platonism in disguise from the Greek Neoplatonic tradition synchronized with Jewish culture?
I don't know about the disguised part, but they do get more and more integrated over time. It's true.
There is a cultural tension inside of the Christian movement of whether it's going to be philosophical or mythological, and you can see this in sermons such as you have in John Chrysostom, whom we haven't mentioned yet, but John Chrysostom sometimes uses Homer to illustrate things in his sermons, and it's really quite fascinating. I have a personal experience of this with Greek Orthodox. Greek Orthodox are much more interested in the philosophical side, especially the Platonic, Neoplatonic traditions, and they are right that the way they formulate theology has a lot to do with Neoplatonism. But if you try to introduce the mythological side of Greek antiquity, they blanch. Soon after one of my books, I was given an invitation to give lectures at a interreligious group in Cyprus. And the Orthodox would not boycotted the session such that they had to withdraw the invitation to me. And I actually have 2 books that have been published in modern Greek, and I had to write a special conclusion to one of them because to explain why this material needs to be accepted as a part of the Greek Orthodox tradition and not just the philosophical one. And a coda, I was in Greece at a professional society. I was wearing a name tag that said Dennis MacDonald, and I went into a bookstore next to the university to buy some books. The person at the counter saw Dennis MacDonald, and he said, "Are you the Dennis MacDonald that wrote the Homeric epics in the Gospel of Mark?" I said, "Yes." He stood up and grabbed my Greek translation of my book, signed it, and gave it to me, and he said, "We use this as a textbook at the University of Athens."
Oh, wow.
So there is a thirst for this kind of thing among academics, not about the from the Orthodox,
Right,
because these analogies between Jesus and classical Greek poetry are a threat to them. And the person that funded the translation and publication of this book in Greek was a Greek atheist.
Oh, you're lucky you got a hold of it. Well, we've got a lot more people that aren't academic. For example, MythVision and other YouTube channels that are really into this stuff. And we need to do that more. Mm-hmm. So, dude, I really appreciate all of these, the love, the questions, the super chats, of course, keep us going. So for those who obviously have an issue with the way that I run things here, this is how I do this, just so you know. Like, this is full-time. This is the way that I provide to make sure I'm doing what I'm doing and getting these wonderful gentlemen here. Oh, man, you had to ask the question. Okay, so it's tied in, Mitch. I'll in the question that was asked, Mitch asked, Stoic influences that might tie on to Tempora K's question. Stoic influences that might tie in to...
I'm sure that Richard has a lot to say about it. The issue of Stoicism needs to be understood really within the context of Neoplatonism, because you have this merging of Stoicism. It's not a pure form of Stoicism. It's a Platonized
It's eclectic
version,
for sure.
and it's called sometimes Middle Platonism or Late Stoicism. And yes, that is very important for Christian identity. And you can see this in Augustine's City of God, where a lot of Stoic or Middle Platonic texts are preserved, because he sees the similarities between what has happened by the 4th century with Christian theology, and the big point is this: the Stoics were able to give an ethic to Platonism that the Platonic corpus wasn't able to supply. And Stoicism was largely a philosophy built on ethics and on conduct and on the satisfaction of living in life according to your state. Not too far, by the way, from Confucianism, actually.
Yeah, indeed. Actually, Stoicism and Confucianism have a lot. Actually, Roman culture and Chinese culture, Han Chinese culture especially, had a lot in common. But there's also just metaphysics. The metaphysics, Stoic metaphysics is influential. So pneumatology and logos theory have a lot of influence from Stoic stuff. I cite some examples, cite some of the scholarship on this. There's been some articles by scholars who've written this, explored mostly in like the Pauline corpus and then some other later theology not too far from Paul. But yeah, Stoicism definitely had an effect, but it's important to understand in context. By the time we get to the Roman Empire, eclecticism in philosophy was very popular, even among the pagans. So especially among the more scientific ones, because those are the ones that I study the most, eclecticism was the norm. So you wouldn't go around claiming I'm a Platonist or I'm an Epicurean. Like, there were people who did that. There were people, but usually there were a lot also people who said, like, no, you pick and choose and you assemble your own philosophy from among all the ideas that you get. Even Seneca, who of course is a famous Stoic philosopher and identified very much strongly with Stoicism, even he says you should take nectar from all of the philosophies. You should study them all and then build your own philosophy out of them. So eclecticism was already normal. Like, a lot of people were doing it. So for Christianity to have an eclectic philosophical perspective is completely in context to make sense.
It would be fun to read Marcus Aurelius's memoirs in the context of Christianity at the same time.
Yeah. And he even mentions Christians in the in that.
Thank you. Cade, Welly, thank you for the love. No question, just send in love. I wish all of you guys way more than luck. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. That's our final question that we took. And Cade, really email me, derek@mythvisionpodcast.com. And I would like to do something special, especially for all the support that you do. It really helps me a lot. Seriously, I can try and do something to reward you in return for all your help. Indo says, I would buy your book, but if my parents found a book in my room called Jesus from Space, I'd probably get kicked out. Thanks for your time, guys. Hell, Glycon?
Well, definitely then don't buy Hitler, Homer, Bible, Christ. That won't go over well either.
That's a good super chat, and that's hilarious. Jesus from Space. Oh my, can you imagine? They probably wouldn't understand, of course, what it's trying to say.
Right. Especially it has a psychedelic cover too, which that would not fly.
We're drug testing this. What the hell? Thank you so much. Oh man, I really appreciate it. So, gentlemen, plug. We'll start with you, Carrier. We'll go to Dennis. Plug. How can people help you?
Yeah, if you want to help, and I'm an independent scholar. This is what I do for a living. Is do appearances. I publish writings. I blog. My Patreon supporters help fund my blog, so that all my blog articles are available for free around the world. So I welcome anyone who's willing to support me on Patreon. That's probably one of the most important ways that keeps me doing what I do. But I also teach online courses every month. You can find out about that. Buy my books. It's great to get the royalties from the books. And it's best I get a commission if you buy the books through my website. Any link on my website will go through Amazon, and Amazon will actually tip me for it. So I get a royalty and a commission if you do it that way. But I also have other recommendations. So I have a recommendations page there where, for origins of Christianity, for philosophy of naturalism, for ancient science. And all of that stuff, I have to admit, I am a shill for Amazon because they give me a commission if you buy through my site. So go, they would love it if you go there and buy a bunch of books through my site. So that's, I cobble together a living through all these little income streams. So any of them are helpful. And if you want to explore more, I have a how to help link on my website where you can go and look at all the different things.
Like classes. I mean,
honestly, I even sell a card game, a weird card game I invented in high school in the 1980s. So there's all kinds of stuff in there.
Ways to help. Awesome.
Anyway, richardcarrier.info. You can find all that and all my feeds, Facebook,
it's down
Twitter.
in the description too.
Yeah.
So they can go. They're not like guessing what it is. There are hyperlinks in the description of this video.
Cool.
They can go boxer, fencer. Before we get to Dennis, real quick. Write your message, your question. I didn't see it because I'm looking at the super chats, and when people do that, that's how I keep Myth Vision alive. So if you have a normal gray, because it comes across as gray text among hundreds of other gray text where people are asking questions, and most of the content that is not super chatted is like not even talking about what we're talking about. Usually people are like, no, my dog is bigger than your dog. And I'm like, okay, we're talking
and
about...
And it flies back too fast to follow.
It flies so fast, so forgive me. You've been around forever, so I want to try and answer your question, and I didn't see a super chat from you, so I'm just going with the color that pops up, and it's a way of keeping Myth Vision going. So for those who wonder, why is it always super chats? Well...
There's quite a lot of them already.
You go to work 9 to 5 and, make sure you.
Yeah.
Anyway...
Dennis,
how can people support what you do, or what would you like people? Because you got a different agenda. You know what I mean? What is your thing?
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a social media presence other than what you are doing and occasionally some other interviews. If people are interested in supporting my work, they should be supporting your work. I'm embarrassed that my books, though in print, are for the most, not all of them are, but they are quite expensive. And the distribution does not include very much distribution or advertising outside of North America. And these books, for the most part, are also not available audibly or as PDFs. So what I'd like people to do, if they're interested in reading my work, is just get introduced to it either by Mythologizing Jesus, which is the most fun. It has to do with the Mimesis criticism, or a kind of introduction to the Q hypothesis I have, a book that is called From the Earliest Gospel to the Gospel of Mark. And unfortunately, it also is quite expensive. But I'm hoping soon to finish a book that I call a mimetic synopsis of the Gospels, which is a reference work that includes every word in the Gospels in an English translation, with a methodological introduction and introductions to individual tales that have parallels, especially in Greek poetry, but many also in the Jewish Bible. So stay alert to that. And you'll know about that if you stay alert to what Derek Lambert is trying to do in this website.
We only scratched.
Once that comes out, spread the word about it. Get more people excited about it. Make that a thing for people to start looking at.
Absolutely, ladies and
I'm
gentlemen.
saying that to the audience even.
Yeah, that's what you just get more people aware, share it out there, start spreading it, because once you watch these videos that I'm going to be putting out, I think most people who don't have the content, I really recommend they get the books to be convinced of it.
Yeah.
The same as I would recommend anyone who comes into this going, no, Bart Ehrman believes Jesus exists, therefore I don't need to read Richard. No, you should be educated on it so you can at least know why. Even if you don't agree with some of the data, you go, I'm sorry. I think
at least know the correct reasons why I believe what I believe.
Right, and the same goes for Dennis. How many people hand wave him off? It was in the air. It's not Mimesis. Have you read anything? No.
Yeah.
So once you guys get into it, I would like for you guys to spread this like wildfire on the web. Let more people know. because me and Richard are convinced on this mimesis to the Greek poets, epic poets, you name it, Euripides the Bacchae, obviously with Dionysus, and Iliad, the Odyssey, Aeneid, of course, which is working off of the previous literature. It's really a revelation, like a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
When you hear, like, for me. And 20
And
years
it's also
ago, it was
exciting
really-
it's a great way to appreciate literature too, because it's
Absolutely.
That's the thing
Read
I
your
find.
Homer.
It's always fascinating to see the creativity and the brilliance. The Bible becomes more brilliant the more you get the parallels they're putting in
That
there
is
and
really
how
important.
How they're using this as a language to communicate the points they want to communicate.
You're right. So I did not see boxer fencers. Okay, my question again. Derek, you forgot my question again. Oh, that was a while ago. Okay, I was waiting, unless they left already. I mean, look, that's how, I try to really do right. And I think people just think, I saw one person go, oh, look.
It refreshes, the scrolling's too fast.
Well, the thing
I
is,
couldn't keep up with it.
Some people don't like that it's people who pay and they get their question answered. And it's like,
But that's the point.
what would you do if you were me? Sorry,
Yeah.
your super chat gets ignored. I'm going only for the gray ones.
Right, all right.
Yeah.
No, it's
I don't know what you expect, so I
yeah.
just hate that. But I'm trying.
Plus, it's like a decent question can be asked for $5. I mean, why are people complaining about $5?
And I'm
don't know.
recording it on 1080p with like a $750 lens, and it's
Right,
super
yeah.
high definition. And I just bought that lens out of my own pocket.
Yeah, yeah.
You gotta imagine what it's like. You invest in the very thing you
That's
believe
right,
in
yeah,
that is
yeah.
going to be changing the world for the better.
You got to get. It has to be monetized somehow. Yeah, people have to support it and make it real.
Yeah. So anyway, I hope you see that, Boxer Fencer. And I know you love the content. You just don't love that I don't answer your question. That's all. But I love you, and I love everybody else who watches, and I totally get it. I do try to, when we run out of Super Chats, try to see if there's a question there. But I'm not about to scroll on my phone. And for those of you who are on here, as I'm leaving, I'm using my phone right now. I don't usually do any of this. It's on my computer. So when the audio dropped, wait for the thing that's going to drop on Patreon. The live, I'm going to splice it all together. The audio does not drop. If there were technical issues, if it glitched, any of that, that's because I'm using my phone. I usually am on my computer doing lives. We don't have that problem.
Yeah, the permanent record is on a completely different camera system, so.
Yeah, you guys will see that, and your names getting mentioned and stuff, so it goes down in history. And when Dennis and Richard go to see God in heaven, I'm just kidding. Love you guys, and never forget, we
Are
Myth.